Every digestive organ has four basic layers, or tunics, which can be modified based on the organ's purpose, kind of like as we saw in blood vessels. So, moving from superficial to deep. First, on the very outside, we have the serosa, which is basically a layer of dense connective tissue. Then we have the muscularis externa, which is actually both of these things. There's two layers of smooth muscle. Then we have the submucosa, which tends to be very difficult for students to identify. It's a diffuse layer with glands, lymphatics, blood vessels. It's like the dermis of the skin. And then finally, we have the mucosa, which is what food brushes up against as it passes through the digestive tract. And then this here is the open space of the lumen. The serosa is an areolar tissue covering. It can be a little bit closer to dense connective tissues as well. It's sometimes really thickened, and here's the serosa on this picture. Sometimes it can be really thickened, and when the serosa is very thick, we call it the adventitia. Um, yes, if in organs that are above your diaphragm, like your esophagus, you call the serosa the adventitia. If we are below the diaphragm, we will call it serosa. I've seen some old histological references that just call it adventitia, period. So be careful, be careful. Your book calls it serosa. The muscularis externa consists of two layers of smooth muscle. We have the longitudinal layer, and then we have the circular layer. The longitudinal layer helps the tube contract lengthwise, making it shorter, and the circular layer helps the tube contract by reducing the diameter of the lumen. Between these two layers is something called the myenteric nerve plexus. It's a network of nerves controlling motility, and it arises from cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve. This nerve plexus contains autonomic motor fibers. As the contractions are, they're not consciously controllable, and this is smooth muscle. So these two layers or tunics made of smooth muscle, these are involuntarily controlled. The circular layer is more superficial than the longitudinal layer. I'm sorry, I had a brain fart there. And sometimes you can see these two pronounced pieces of meat in the slides, like it's kind of pictured here. That does look like meat. But sometimes these layers can be of variable thicknesses, making them difficult to differentiate from each other. The submucosa itself, it can be very difficult for students to visualize. This picture, the histological picture, is taken from the middle portion of the small intestine, which is known as the jejunum. On this picture, the lumen is lined, and this is the lumen up here. The lumen is lined by these finger-like projections. The meaty looking layers down here, this is the muscularia externa, and the serosa is a very thin layer of areolar tissue here. The submucosa has arteries and veins and nerves and lymphatics all running through it and glands. These structures are usually embedded in some type of connective tissue that's on the spectrum between adipose, areolar, and dense connective tissues. It's got a lot of collagen. The submucosal glands, they secrete enzymes depending on the organ, but almost all of the organs in the digestive tract, they have submucosal glands that secrete something, most probably buffers, to raise the acidic contents of the pH. The submucosa also, it also has its own plexus. obviously called the submucosal plexus, and it controls the secretion of the glands and dilution or constriction of other vessels in the submucosal layer. Just like the myenteric plexus, it's a branch of cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve. And I will just highlight all this here. All of this lighter color is all of the submucosa. And see, it's not a nice, like, circular layer as I kind of have it pictured in my little picture on the right. The mucosa is the inner lining of any digestive organ, and from the mouth all the way to the anus, it's kind of a continuous sheet that lines the open space. It's not just a flat sheet covering. Depending on the organ, it can have folds, it can have finger-like projections, it can have a whole lot of stuff that makes it not flat. The digestive tract's mucosa, it changes considerably through regions of the GI tract. The esophagus starts with stratified squamous keratinized epithelium at its opening, and then at the bottom of the esophagus, it transitions into non keratinized. The stomach, the small intestine, large intestine, they all have simple columnar epithelium adapted for secretion or absorption. But the anus and the mouth are lined with stratified squamous keratinized so that you can shed cells as feces pass through your anus. Your anus, not the planet Uranus. Anyway, despite the changes in epithelia throughout the tract, the one common cell type are mucus cells, formerly called goblet cells. They are scattered among the epithelial cells of the entire digestive tract, and they secrete a bicarbonate rich mucus. So it doesn't just lubricate the food moving through, it also buffers it, meaning that it prevents pH change or actually raises it. In almost all the slides that we look at in this class of the epithelium, in almost everything, epithelium stained a very dark purple color. And that results from the use of the hematoxylin and eosin slide staining process. So all of this here with its like finger-like projections, all of this is the mucosa. All of this over here with its dark purple stain is mucosa. And actually, I just want to point this out. This here is the muscularis externa, and it kind of looks like meat.